Hello and welcome to Unit 3, Developing an Advocacy Strategy to Build an Enabling Environment for Evaluation Part 2. My name is Neha Karkara. This video lecture will take you through the following topics: framing advocacy messages and choosing advocacy messengers, identifying opportunities in the decision-making process to generate demand for evaluations, using effective lobbying and negotiation skills, and engaging with the media, including social media, assessing the external and internal advocacy environment, and creating a long-term advocacy strategy by setting advocacy goals, interim outcomes, and activities. And finally, incorporating monitoring and evaluation within the advocacy strategy. This unit is a continuation of Unit 2. In Unit 2, we had covered Question 1 and Question 2 of the 9 questions model of strategic advocacy planning. In this unit, we will be covering the remaining questions 3 to 9. Let's start with question 3. What do they need to hear? Answering this question requires developing evidence-based messages that are crafted for each specific target audience. Advocacy requires clear, consistent, and effective messages. To do this, you need to think about what you want to say and how you should say it. Advocacy communication should seek to inform, persuade, and move people to action. Developing messages is then a continuous part of an advocacy initiative. Messages often need to be revised as you learn more about your policy issue and what appeals to your target audiences. But first, you need to develop one clear primary message, which clearly summarizes your position and the changes you want to bring about. One way to develop a primary message is to first think of a statement, which is the central idea of your message. The second is to think of the evidence that supports the statement with easily understood facts and figures. And finally, consider what is the action desired. That is, what is it that you want your target to do? Now let's take a look at what an advocacy message should not look like. Here is an example. Building a culture of evaluation is a critical issue, and we are working on it as part of our WOPE's 2014-2015 policy. Not only is evaluation a powerful tool for improvement and change, there are many developmental benefits to be gained from this. We see much long-term impact on people's lives by investing in evaluation. If you are interested, we can provide more information to you about how evaluation provides feedback for informed decision-making by putting the best available evidence at the center of the policy process. We hope you and your colleagues will keep the importance of investing in evaluation in mind as a top priority as you debate new national policies this year. So why do you think this does not make for an effective advocacy message? Well, first, it contains just too much jargon. An effective advocacy message is one that easily explains technical information to someone who does not know the subject. Second, there is no clear request for action from the audience. The advocacy message does not clearly say what action it would like its target audience to take. And finally, the advocacy message is way too long. Now, what could be an effective way of framing this message? Think of the statement, evidence, and desired action model we discussed earlier. For example, your primary message could be, your policy decision has an impact on people's lives. 1 in 3 policies fail because they don't look at evidence. The immediate priority is to use evidence from evaluation when making policies. This primary message can also guide potential slogans, sound bites, or stories used in advocacy work. For example, evaluate before you decide, or year of evaluation for better lives, or evaluation is cost effective. There is value in evaluation. The primary message will then guide the development of more specific secondary messages that will be directed at different audiences, perhaps on different aspects of the primary message. The stakeholder analysis should provide important information that should assist you in the preparation of these effective messages. Secondary messages also often explain how the objectives of the primary message will be met, including the actions that should be taken by the audience addressed. It is also important to note that several secondary messages may be needed, each framed to the specific needs of an audience. For example, a tailored message to a parliamentarian may say, use evaluation to prove that government spending and policies are working to create better lives. Now, if you were targeting the directors of planning, your message could say, What can't be evaluated cannot be managed. Put evaluation in the forefront to improve policy planning and decision making. The donor group might need to hear better evaluation improves the allocation and monitoring of aid. Messages targeting the media might say better evaluation will improve the means to hold the government accountable for its policies. So you see, the primary message has the potential to be framed differently according to the audience the message is aimed at. Here are a few rules to help you choose the content of your advocacy message. The first and foremost rule is to know your audience. Find out what they know, their concerns, their values and priorities, what kind of evidence they seek, and what kind of language they use. Next, know your political and policy environment and moment. What are the big controversies and the big issues in your context? Consider how might they affect your messaging. Keep your messages simple and brief. Make sure someone who does not know the subject can easily understand the information. As we discussed earlier, avoid any jargon related to monitoring and evaluation. Next, use real life stories and quotes. The human element makes a problem or an issue real. Quotes and personal stories bring to life the challenges faced by those directly affected. And then, use facts and numbers accurately and creatively. For example, instead of saying over 30% of policies fail, it is more effective to say 1 in 3 policies fail because they don't invest in monitoring and evaluation. And then, present a possible solution and encourage the audience to take action. You must be clear about what action your audience, whether it's the policymaker or civil society, can take to support your cause. Offer straightforward suggestions like support the evaluation bill in Parliament or sign our online petition for the national evaluation policy. Always tell your audience what you propose in order to advance better use of evaluation and keep it simple. For instance, the government needs to show its commitment to the national evaluation policy by allocating appropriate funds for its implementation. And finally, reinforce your message. Usually, delivering a message once is not enough. Always have a strategy to reinforce your message, either yourself or through others. Now that we have understood what constitutes an effective advocacy message, let's move on to question number 4. Who do they need to hear it from? Answering this question requires determining the most strategic choice for an advocacy messenger based on the context. When delivering an advocacy message, you need to determine who will be the most credible source in the eyes of the target audience. Sometimes policy skills are important, but other times, first hand knowledge of the problem, technical expertise, or seniority within an organization matter more. Also, it can be effective to have two messengers who complement each other, one knowledgeable about the subject matter and the other knowledgeable about the target audience. Here are some tips on choosing an advocacy messenger. The messenger should be known and trusted by, or we can say should appeal to the target audiences. The messenger should demonstrate knowledge and insight into the issue. He or she should be a source whose opinion target audience will value. And finally, the messenger should refrain from political comments unrelated to the issue. Now that we know how to develop advocacy messages and how to choose advocacy messengers wisely, it brings us to question number 5. How can we make sure they hear it? Making sure your audience hears the message involves identifying opportunities in the decision making process, choosing the best medium for message delivery, lobbying and negotiation, and working with the media and partners. Let's go into each of these aspects more closely. Identifying opportunities in the decision making process. Following the policy calendar, nationally, regionally, and internationally, provides many opportunities that can serve as entry points to begin creating demand for evaluation. These opportunities can be used to strengthen the advocacy position, create alliances, raise awareness, and to get the advocacy message across. Mapping out possible advocacy opportunities in relation to the decision making process will help in developing an overall advocacy strategy. These moments could be as simple as meeting with a parliamentarian, attending a conference, or connecting with celebrations around a policy success or an event such as Evaluations Day. The advocacy opportunities could also be more formal, for instance, taking part in government's consultations on major policy reviews, such as the poverty reduction strategies and national plans of action, and drafting of the new constitution. Connecting with opportunities requires time, energy, and resources. So make sure the opportunity has the potential to exert influence, bring together allies, and those who can be converted to become allies, as well as those people who hold power over the issue. Here are some potential ideas. International policies, commitments, and conventions are valuable tools to fuel national and local level advocacy. The advocacy processes around these can draw upon national, regional, and international advocacy networks. International events and processes can be leveraged to generate demand for evaluation at the national level. Currently, an opportunity exists to link with the dialogue around the forthcoming Sustainable Development Goals and to demand greater commitment to evaluation in post 2015 programs and national goals. Evalia, or the International Year of Evaluation 2015, also presents an opportunity and an entry point to advocate for equity focused and gender responsive national evaluation policies and systems. To help you identify and plan opportunities at each stage of the policy making process, that is, agenda setting, formulation and enactment, implementation and enforcement, and monitoring and evaluation, a useful matrix is available in the reading material. Now, moving on to choosing the best medium for message delivery. Effective messaging relies on careful attention not only to the message itself, but also to how it is transmitted, known as the medium. The message, messenger, and the medium will be determined by the audience you're trying to reach. Think of what medium will be most effective for message delivery. For example, the message could be delivered person to person through one to one communication, lobbying visits, group or community meetings, conferences and workshops, public hearings, protests, and public demonstrations. The message could also be delivered through the print medium, such as through an advocacy booklet, newspapers, magazines, journals, newsletters, leaflets, pamphlets, reports, studies, and letters to decision makers. You could also use the electronic medium, including the radio, television, video, film, the internet, and mobile phone technology. The idea here is to find out which medium will effectively reach out to each target audience and influential. One of the tools that you can use to reach out to your target audiences is an advocacy booklet on evaluation. The advocacy booklet is composed of various sections that will allow you to highlight major evaluation themes and messages. Refer to the reading material for a potential structure for such an advocacy booklet. Here, it is interesting to note how the Evaluation Society of Kenya, or ESK, is promoting a culture of evaluation using a range of advocacy opportunities. In 2012, ESK was launched in a high visibility event jointly organized by the Ministry of Planning through the Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate. The event also kickstarted a 3-day inaugural National Monitoring and Evaluation Week, which is held annually in Kenya. ESK, in partnership with the Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate and other development partners, used this platform to advocate for greater use of evaluation in Kenya. The event also raised the visibility of ESK and Kenya's National Integrated Monitoring and Evaluation System as agencies that track and communicate development results. By showcasing itself as a legitimate and credible partner with the government on evaluation related themes, ESK increased its leverage in future advocacy evaluation efforts. National and subnational officials from civil society organizations, government, UN agencies, academia, media, and research institutions also participated in the event. Advocacy messages were delivered by the Assistant Minister for Planning, UNICEF's country director, and DFID's high-level representative from the UK Evaluation Office. The 3-day event also helped to serve as a membership recruitment drive for ESK. The increase in members and partners added additional strength to ESK's evaluation advocacy work. The organization is currently in the process of formalizing its relationship with the Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate through an MOU. Getting back to how we can effectively deliver the advocacy message, let's look at lobbying. Lobbying involves direct communication with decision makers and others who have influence over them. Essentially, lobbying is about educating and convincing them to support and advance your agenda. The primary targets of lobbying are the people with the power to influence a policy change on your issue. Here are some ground rules for lobbying. Cultivate good long term relations with your target decision makers, but don't confuse access with influence. And don't let good relationships stop you from taking public action where necessary and if appropriate. Also, be propositional rather than oppositional wherever possible. Seek to establish yourself as a trusted source of evidence and policy advice. Give credit where it is due, because failure to do so is what many decision makers dislike most about development actors. Moreover, don't expect to achieve change in one meeting or letter. Where appropriate, inform targets of media and popular mobilization actions in advance, and share briefing papers before publishing them. In addition to lobbying, advocacy generally requires high negotiation skills. Negotiating means advancing the issue by presenting a position and dealing with opposition by understanding and managing power dynamics within and among the institutions being influenced. It is a process that involves bargaining, good communication, and understanding of the relative power and interests of all stakeholders, and willingness to engage in dialogue and to compromise. For effective negotiation, it is essential to establish your authority and credibility. Make sure you have an explicit mandate. For example, show that your organization is part of regional and global efforts to promote the use of evaluation in evidence based policy making, and make that known to the other party. Also, enlist support and show clout. Use allies to maximize resources and respect. In addition, step up the pressure to demonstrate the cost of not reaching a settlement. And finally, maintain control over the process. Anticipate the reactions of the other party and build support behind the scenes for your agenda using allies. Another way to deliver an advocacy message is through the media. The media is both a tool and target for advocacy. It can play a key role in building awareness and shaping public opinion on the use of evidence in policy making and using evaluation to promote accountability and transparency. The media can also put direct pressure on a government to use evidence in policy making by placing it in the spotlight. It can shape the nature of debates, generate action, and influence governments to increase demand for evaluation, both directly and through its power to influence and mobilize opinion. For these reasons, the specific role of the media in achieving advocacy goals should be clearly integrated into the evaluation advocacy strategy. In engaging with the media, there are several tools that you can use. For example, press releases, press conferences, media briefing, press kits, interviews, sending letters, writing opinion editorials. Which tool you use will depend partly on the strength of your story, the resources you have available, and logistical issues. However, in order to be effective, there are some general rules of working with the media. First, be reliable and be accurate. A reputation for unreliability is a barrier to getting coverage. You must be trusted. You should also know your facts. Second, provide useful information and good and clear stories. And finally, do not lecture. It works against a sound long term relationship based on respect. To win coverage with the media, you have to give your story every possible competitive advantage. Getting the media interested in your story involves a set of strategies, including making your story newsworthy and easy to cover, and also building relationships with reporters and meeting editorial deadlines. When talking of media, it is also essential to consider how to integrate social media in evaluation advocacy. Social media is an inexpensive tool for advocacy that can help you start a conversation on evaluation with a large number of people. This is because social media tools provide a huge range of opportunities to enhance your advocacy and influencing work, from widening participation, creating conversations with people, to crowdsourcing solutions to reaching decision makers. The first step in utilizing social media is to create a plan. Creating a social media plan requires you to first consider, what do you want to achieve? Is your goal narrow, such as publicizing an event, such as the launch of the National Evaluation Policy, or is it broad, such as building and engaging with a community or coalition of evaluation professionals? Second, who is the audience you would like to reach? Are you primarily communicating with people who are already familiar with your organization's work, such as your members and partners? Or are you reaching out to targets and the influentials part of your larger advocacy strategy? Third, which social media platforms should you focus on? This decision should be guided by your objectives and intended target audience. There are several social media platforms, but it is best to use one or two platforms. And finally, consider which resources and materials will you share through social media. Now let's look at the next two set of questions together. Question 6, what have we got? And question 7, what do we need to develop? Answering these questions together requires assessing the external and internal advocacy environment to create a long term advocacy strategy. Assessing the internal and external advocacy environment. An effective advocacy effort takes careful stock of the advocacy resources that are already there to be built on. Essentially, you do not start from scratch, you start from building on what you have got. After taking stock of the advocacy resources you have, the next step is to identify the advocacy resources you need that are not there yet. By advocacy resources, we mean looking at previous advocacy experiences, also advocacy capacities that are there or that need to be built, such as outreach, media, research. Look at existing partnerships or those that need to be built. Government and media contacts, available funding, global and regional support for your advocacy, and concrete evidence which may be available or which may need to be developed. This assessment can be done effectively using the ACT ON model. Here, A stands for advantages that you may have that will significantly increase your capacity for effective advocacy. C is for challenges. This requires an environmental assessment, but it begins by looking at the organization internally. T stands for threats. The idea here is to turn a threat into an opportunity. O is for opportunities that will minimize the threats and advance the agenda. And N is for next steps that must be identified. However, all next steps cannot begin at once. In order to prioritize, determine what is critical and where support and time is available. The next steps can connect with any of the advantages, challenges, threats, and opportunities. This model provides a simple way to assess the internal forces that determine your organization's potential to carry out a strategy and the external forces that will help or hinder it. As the internal and external advocacy environment keeps changing, this tool may be used many times during the implementation and management of advocacy. In the reading material, you can see an example where this ACT ON model has been applied to a hypothetical WOPE advocating for a national evaluation policy. Now moving on to question 8. How do we begin? Answering this question entails setting advocacy goals, interim outcomes, and activities which help to move from planning to action. The advocacy goal is the subject of your advocacy effort. It is your vision for the next 10 to 20 years. The advocacy goal can be general. For example, develop and implement a national evaluation policy. The goals indicate what the advocacy strategy is aiming to accomplish in the policy or funding environment. Advocacy interim outcomes are shorter term results that must be achieved in order to reach the advocacy goal. Generally, the time frame for an advocacy interim outcome will be 1 to 3 years. It must focus on a specific action that the organization can take. For example, an advocacy interim outcome can state all major political parties endorse the development of a national evaluation policy in their core commitments by 2015. Advocacy strategies usually have multiple interim outcomes that are achieved on the way to that goal. Advocacy tactics or activities are the specific outputs and products that contribute to the interim outcomes and might include events, conferences, press releases, publications, meetings, etc. The advocacy tactics or activities help to achieve the interim outcomes. For each advocacy tactic, it is important to identify the roles of specific WOPE members who have the responsibility for taking it forward. While framing these advocacy goals and interim outcomes, ensure that they are SMART, by which we mean goals and interim outcomes should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, resourced, relevant, and time bound. They should also be change oriented rather than activity oriented. They should describe the change you intend to bring about and not what you intend to do. The change should be quantified, and the interim outcome should state who will do it and by when. For example, an advocacy interim outcome could be to mobilize the government to invest in a national evaluation policy. Now, converting this into a SMART interim outcome might rephrase it as to assist the Ministry of Planning to draft the national evaluation policy by 2015. In the reading material, you can take a look at examples of advocacy activities, interim outcomes, goals, and impacts that can help you to determine alternate paths to achieve policy goals. Now we come to the last of the 9 questions. How do we tell if it is working? Answering this question entails incorporating and implementing a robust monitoring and evaluation plan within the advocacy strategy. By building monitoring and evaluation into evaluation advocacy planning from the start, you can connect the goals you want to achieve with the development of indicators for success. An early step in monitoring and evaluation planning for advocacy typically entails developing a logic model or a theory of change, which is an explanation of how a given effort will bring about change and what results are anticipated. This will set the overall framework for monitoring and evaluation, giving the advocacy team a way to categorize and make sense of available information throughout the advocacy effort, and a basis for more in depth studies by external evaluators during or after the intervention. It is highly recommended that you go through Unit 4 of this course to learn more about monitoring and evaluating advocacy. Here, it will also be useful to look up Tool 12 in the reading material that provides definitions and measurement indicators for advocacy activities, interim outcomes, goals, and impacts. With this, we have now covered all the 9 questions for advocacy strategy planning. After answers have been collected for all the 9 questions, use this planning worksheet to organize the information and to develop your own evaluation advocacy strategy. This worksheet is also available in the reading material. Finally, while putting together the evaluation advocacy strategy, there are 2 factors that should be paid attention to. First is the participation in advocacy planning. There are many reasons why participation in planning is critical for effective advocacy. Participation by the organization staff, board, members, partners, and constituents help to generate commitment, create shared ideals and directions, speed up action, and helps to cope with any emerging conflicts and differences. Participation in advocacy planning also helps to assess political risks and improves the organization's accountability. For effective participation in advocacy planning, schedule time for planning as part of the strategy. The other important consideration while planning for advocacy is to prepare a realistic budget for the advocacy effort, since the resources available for advocacy often change the shape of the strategy. Consider how much money or other resources you will need to carry out your planned activities. You must also calculate how much you will need to cover the general operations of an advocacy effort, as well as any unexpected expenses. For detailed information on budgeting and fundraising for advocacy, be sure to go through Unit 8 of this e-learning course. With this, we come to the end of Unit 3. Thank you for taking this video lecture.